Hey, I'm Renee Hobbs, and thanks for joining. Tonight's session is kind of exciting for us. It's part of the Courageous Rhode Island program. We're thinking a lot about youth media. I'm here with my colleague, Ben Thevenin from Brigham Young University, and Pam Stager and Yamaya Jean. Now, our Media Education Lab webinars, of course, you guys, many of you know, we're trying to build a knowledge community. And of course, we're paying a lot of attention right now to the war in Israel and Gaza and the political turmoil that's happening, you know, all around us. And Ben Thevenin's going to talk to us about the importance of media literacy and active listening. And we're thinking about these topics in relation to disinformation, political divisions, violent extremism, because we know we have to learn how to listen more effectively to each other. And we're all having to learn that. So thanks, Chuck, for putting your where you're from into the chat. That is really great because we are coming from all over the country and all over the world. Okay, so Ben, I hardly need to introduce you except for the fact that I've known you since forever, it seems. He's an associate professor of media arts at Brigham Young University. He teaches and conducts research on film and new media studies, media literacy, children's culture, social and environmental justice. And he's also a media maker. He's made podcasts and games and websites and films. And he's helping with the Courageous Youth Media component. You know, we're giving away $7,000 in prizes to students from across Rhode Island and all around the country. So be on the lookout for more of that information about how you can involve middle school students, high school students, and college students. In a way, this is our first kind of lead in to that exciting youth media contest. Take it away, Ben.
Thanks, Renee. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. And you can see the screen, hopefully. I am really grateful for the chance to be a part of the Media Education Lab's webinar series and also Courageous Rhode Island. I'm really pleased to see all of you in attendance today. And thank you, Renee, for giving me this chance to pal around with you a little bit tonight. And just for your mentorship, you know, I knew Renee back when I was a grad student, and she's been a great mentor to me ever since, and to many of us. Before we dive into our conversation about media literacy and active listening tonight, I do want to give us a chance to do a little check-in. This is something actually I do with my kids. I have 3 boys. I picked them up from school and we were driving home. I'll ask them about their sweets and their sours. Give them a chance to talk about some of the things that worked for them during the day, that made them happy, that they're excited about, and some of the things that maybe brought some concern into their lives. There's a lot of things going in our world right now, both globally and in our personal lives and our professional lives, positive and negative. And I feel like just so we can take the temperature of the room, we can check into how everyone's feeling. I'd love for you to share in the chat a sweet and a sour, something that you're excited about that's made you happy, something that maybe brings you some concern. And give us a chance to kind of like, I don't know, see how everyone's feeling. Pam, can I ask you to share a sweet or a sour or both with the group?
Sure. So I just moved to this little village from Providence, Rhode Island, to a little island village in the south of Rhode Island. And yesterday was my first Halloween here. And they really do it up big. And they had this big, for a little village, a big Halloween parade that was so much more than I was expecting. The sour and sweets is that not one person came to my door, so I'm left with all the
candy. Sour, but lots of sweets left over. Gotcha. All right, that's a great one. I'm glad to hear people sharing the chat. Renee's been in Europe for the last month or so. And I imagine that re-entry is going to be a bit bumpy. Thanks, David, for sharing. Wow, in Brasov, Romania, that's really exciting. And I'm really sorry to hear that you have COVID. Our family was dealing with it not too long ago as well. Stanley, thanks for sharing your sweet, your sour. I'm so glad it's beautiful in the Bay Area today. I'm a California resident myself. I love the weather, especially when it starts getting cold in Utah, to be able to return home to California. Cecilia, thanks for sharing your experience with your holiday as well. I hope that people are doing well. I know that there's a lot going on in our world, and I hope that actually our conversation today allows us to, in some ways, maybe make sense, even have some hope that the things going on in our world today, like that we can do something about them, right? We're experiencing political division at home, political turmoil around the world, multiple wars happening. And I hope that our discussion of media literacy and active listening can be some little effort to positively address some of these difficulties. Thanks for everyone, Scott, everyone for sharing in the chat. Why don't we dive into our conversation? I'm going to start with sharing a quote from the author Ursula Le Guin. In 2002, I believe she gave a speech, wrote an essay called The Operating Instructions. And in it, she describes what she understands to be the core principles to living a full life. She writes, "What a child needs, and what we all need, is to find some other people who have imagined life along lines that make sense to us and allow some freedom, and listen to them. Not hear passively, but listen. Listening is an act of community, which takes space, time, and silence. Reading is a means of listening. Reading is not as passive as hearing or viewing. It's an act. You do it. You read at your own pace, your own speed, not the ceaseless, incoherent, gabbling, shouting rush of the media. I know no reason why our media could not create a similar community of the imagination, as theater has often done in societies of the past, but they're mostly not doing it." So in this quote, Le Guin notes that we can gain a lot from the expressions and the experiences of those that we trust, right? Who have imagined life along lines that make sense to us and allow some freedom. And she emphasizes that listening is active, something that we do, and that it's different than something just passively hearing. Le Guin notes that reading can be understood as a form of listening, but that oftentimes our engagement with media does not reflect this type of active doing. And too often, media's content often centers on conflict, not conversation or contemplation. Too often, I think, when we're scrolling through our social media feeds or playing games on our phones or streaming movies or whatever, we're doing so not so much to learn from or empathize with others, but we're doing so to escape. And rather than wonder at the world's beauty or to make sense of the suffering within the world, we're simply using media to withdraw. I think there's some justification for taking a break, watching a show and getting our mind off things. I also think that when we're not fixed on our devices and staring at our screens, when we're not interacting with folks face to face, and then when we are interacting with folks face to face, too often we are, impatient. We're simply waiting for the other person to stop talking so that we can share our opinion, tell our story. And I think too often when we are trying to listen to others, we might find ourselves instead silently disagreeing with their perspectives or passing judgment on them, or even just like simply letting our mind wander. I guess what I'm saying is that we have opportunities to improve, specifically in the area of listening. We're going to be checking in every once in a while with some of the thinkers, the voices that we're engaging with today, with a list of, I don't know if it's to-dos, but maybe guiding principles. How to live a full life, according to Ursula Le Guin. She says that we should listen. And I believe that our engagement with media and with others can be improved specifically through making deliberate efforts to actively listen and to empathize. Especially when the voices that we're listening to they're sharing values and experiences that are different from our own. I'm going to share a few examples of media that attempt to promote this type of empathy through creative modeling what it is to actively listen. We'll have a chance to discuss that a little bit together, and then we'll have a group discussion after we view these few examples I'm going to share. Oh, there you go. Listen. Okay, let's start with StoryCorps. This can be our first case study. In 2003, a man named David Issei launched StoryCorps. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving humanity's stories. And starting with one audio booth in Grand Central Station in New York City, StoryCorps has since recorded literally hundreds of thousands of stories. It's the largest single collection of human voices ever gathered. And then in 2013, StoryCorps created a short animated special called Listening is an Act of Love. And in this little animated short, it introduced the organization's efforts to keep people, I don't know, create connection, to pass on wisdom through sharing their stories. And it samples a few of the stories in their archive. At the beginning of the special, in his conversation with his nephew Benji, Dave Issei introduces kind of their project and shares some of the history, the motivations behind it. Let's watch just a brief excerpt of this conversation that Dave has with his nephew.
I just start by asking you one of the questions on my list, right?
Anything you want.
Okay. So what were you like as a kid?
I was pretty weird. I didn't want to do anything but watch TV. And I spent a lot of time by myself. But I always liked talking to older people, like the waitress at the luncheonette near my house or my grandparents. I remember when I was just a few years older than you, your great-grandpa Abe and your great-grandma Rose and her sisters came over to our apartment for Thanksgiving. After dinner, I found this tape recorder lying around, and somehow I got the idea to interview them. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I recorded their voices and stories, and I saw how much they loved being listened to. A few years later, your great-grandpa and your great-grandma and all her sisters passed away. But I remembered I'd made that tape, so I went looking for it, but I couldn't find it. Even now, when I go to your grandma's house, I go looking for that tape, just hoping it's going to turn up.
I don't get it. Why do you keep looking for it?
Because it would make me so happy to hear those voices again, and I'd love to play that tape for you. You know, doing that recording really taught me something. You can find the most amazing stories from regular people. All you have to do is ask them about their lives and listen.
Really? That's it?
Yeah, it's simple. We can learn so much about the people all around us, even about the people we already know, just by taking the time to have a conversation. And if you pay just a little attention, you'll find wisdom and poetry in their words.
Do people really want you to ask about their lives?
Yeah, they do. Most people love to be listened to because it tells them how much their lives matter. All you need to ask are questions like, who is the most important person in your life? Or what are you proudest of? Really, listening closely is simple. When you're curious, treat people with respect, and have just a little courage to ask the important questions, great things are going to happen.
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that little clip. You'll notice that he starts the conversation by commenting on how he was a weird kid, right, who was obsessed with watching TV. I think that recalls Le Guin's critique of media. Maybe it recalls some of our own experiences. But he also notes how he has always loved listening to others' stories. And he suggests that listening itself is an act of love. Now, I'm pretty media obsessed. I imagine some of you are as well. But hopefully, like Issei, we can also develop an appreciation for talking with and listening to and understanding those around us. Issei provides us with some helpful prompts as we begin to ask questions and actively listen. He reminds us, for example, to be curious, to treat people with respect, to have courage to ask important questions. Now, during the webinar, again, we're going to keep a running list of some of these characteristics of active listening. We're going to see if we can find application to our specific contexts within media education. So I'd like you to consider it says characteristics of active listening. Let's specifically look at the third one here, this have courage to ask important questions. And I want you to reflect on what that might look like within your efforts as an educator or as a member of your community. If you have a thought, write it in the chat. And I'll call on maybe a person or two to expound a little bit on their response, right? What does it look like to have courage and to ask important questions within your efforts as an educator or a member of your community? I'll give you a moment to think and then post a quick response, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of a conversation. Renee, I'm curious, in your experiences traveling across Europe for the past month or so, do you have any particular insight, given some of the communities that you're engaging with, on this idea of having courage to ask important questions?
I definitely became aware of how my questions were rooted in assumptions that sometimes were wrong. And so I, over the last 20 days, tried to ask questions without so much of like, let me confirm what I think I already know. I think that's a habit I do. And I realized that was not very productive to do it like that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, right, asking these questions requires courage, because it puts us in a position of vulnerability that we could potentially be wrong. We could reveal the biases or the assumptions that we have about others when we are earnestly engaging, right? David, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this idea of asking questions that relate to one's direct lived experience. Like, what is courageous about that, do you think?
I think it just, sorry, still a little bit sick here. Well, I think people can speak most clearly and in most interesting ways when they're talking about their own experiences and things that they've experienced. Otherwise, you're speaking in a kind of abstract way about things. So I think when people ground it in their actual realities, I think you get really good stuff with that.
That's great. Yeah, I think that it's fair for us to maybe have bigger picture conversations, but really it's when we get into the specifics of our personal lives and our personal experiences that this really starts to matter. I'm curious about Scott, your response about asking about each other's pain points. Have you had any experiences like doing so? What's it look like to be to have courage to ask about people's pain points?
In my current job, I'm focused on training teachers, and we're focusing on AI in education. And a lot of teachers are just scared and confused, and that's kind of sharing their vulnerabilities. You know, no one likes to look ignorant. People don't like to admit that they're scared of something that other people, you know, are kind of ahead of the game on, or they just feel dumb about it, and they feel like they should know, but they don't. But in order for us to do what we want to do, it's good to maybe start there and help alleviate some of those fears. And
that's a great point, right? That a lot of time when we are active listening, we have to be open to people expressing their difficulties, their worries, their anxieties. And it takes courage to be prepared, right? To be present, to be validating, to be empathetic, right? It also takes courage to answer those questions, right? To reveal the difficulties that we're facing. These are great responses. Feel free to continue to add thoughts in the chat as we go throughout the rest of the conversation. And thanks for being willing to share some of your thoughts, some of your own experiences. Hopefully we're able in these conversations that we're having today to model some of the things that we're discussing as well. Okay, we're going to go on to our next case study. For over 200 years, there's a UK-based organization called the RSA, the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce. And this organization has used research and creativity to facilitate positive social change. For the last 15 years or so, they've been producing short animated videos online that make significant social, political, cultural issues accessible to wider audiences, specifically as a means of informing them and preparing the public to effectively engage with these issues. I'm I'm going to reference one video in particular. In 2013, RSA produced a video with the Australian social philosopher Roman Krznaric about the importance of cultivating empathy and the power of what he calls outrospection. In the following excerpt from that video, Krznaric is going to discuss what it means to be an empathetic listener. He describes some of the examples of efforts to use specific strategies, right, to heal wounds across nations and cultures. I think we're going to find this little clip particularly resonant with what's going on today.
Highly empathic people tend to be very sensitive listeners. They're very good at understanding what somebody else's needs are. There tend to be also people who, in conversations, share part of their own lives, make conversations two-way dialogues, make themselves vulnerable. Worth thinking about as well is to think about political conversations. It won't stop until we talk. This is the motto of a grassroots peace-building organization in Israel and the Palestinian territories called the Parents Circle. What it does is bring together Palestinian and Israeli families who share something very special. These families have all lost members of their own families in the conflict. And the Parents Circle brings them together for conversations, picnics, meetings where they share each other's stories. They discover that they share the same pain, the same blood. They make that empathic bond. They also have other fantastic projects. My favorite one is called Hello Peace. It's a free phone telephone line. So anybody can pick up and call that number. If you're a Palestinian and call it, you're immediately put through to an Israeli. You can have a half-hour conversation. If you're an Israeli, pick it up, you're put through to a Palestinian. Since 2002, over 1 million calls have been logged on the Hello Peace free phone line. That's the kind of project which is trying to create grassroots empathy. Now, we normally think of empathy as something that happens between individuals, but I also believe it can be a collective force. It can happen on a mass scale.
Some of you mentioned this in the chat. Like, sadly, right, the conflict and confusion among different nations and cultures and religions in the Holy Land, that's been going on for thousands of years. It continues today. And the point that this, 10-year-old video makes about the need for active listening and empathy to address this conflict and confusion, it's more applicable now than it ever has been. Krznaric, in this little excerpt, he highlights the efforts of organizations like the Parent Circle, like Hello Peace, that are trying to promote dialogue, right, between the different members of these communities on either side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as a means of fostering empathy, of creating understanding. Hopefully, ultimately, we can only hope, right, to achieve some kind of peace. Now, Krznaric, he's the author of the 2014 book, Empathy, Why It Matters and How to Get It. In this sequence, right, he provided us with some characteristics of highly empathic people. He describes them as people who listen with sensitivity, who seek to understand others' needs, that they engage in two-way dialogues, and that in those dialogues that they're practicing vulnerability. I think it's important to note that Krznaric expands the definition of listening provided by Le Guin and Issei to allow for an exchange, right? Krznaric emphasizes that to listen with empathy often requires us to share something of ourselves, not just to take over the conversation, not just to allow our own perspectives and experiences to overwhelm those with whom we're speaking, but to really be vulnerable. So I think we should add these characteristics that Krznaric gives us to our running list. Also, towards the end of that clip, Krznaric suggests that this type of work, this active listening, this empathizing, that it can take the form of both individual and collective efforts. I think a lot of us probably are making efforts in our classrooms, right, to model active listening, to model empathy. But also, we see one of the objectives of that is so that we can create a new culture, at the very least in our classroom, in which we see active listening and empathy become a collective effort. In my classes, for example, especially teaching undergraduate media arts students, many of whom are just like so eager to share their stories and let their voices be heard in their creative work. I try to focus on this opportunity that we have, all of us, me and my students as creators, as citizens to collectively use listening and empathy to do some good in the world, to use creative collaboration to promote dialogue and foster understanding. So, for example, a few years ago, I advised a student-led project called How Can I Help? A couple of students, Dallin and Cambry, undergraduate, film students, were inspired by their personal experiences navigating mental health issues when they were younger. And they developed together a stop-motion animated web series that introduces kids and their grown-ups to conversations about mental illness. And in each episode, a colorful claymation animal experiences a different mental health diagnosis. It includes anxiety and depression, OCD, ODD, and so on. And the series presents information about mental health in ways that are accessible to young audiences. It encourages the kids watching to seek support, for example, from trusted adults in their lives. More than anything, How Can I Help? It's meant to encourage viewers to feel safe, having vulnerable conversations. And it helps kids who may be facing some of these challenges to feel heard and supported. Now, the final episode in the series features Liam the zebra. And Liam, unlike the rest of the characters, doesn't face any mental health challenges, but instead he models for viewers how to listen to, care for, and be close to our friends who might be struggling. Now, I would say that even though this video is specifically created within the context of helping folks struggling with mental health concerns, right? I think that the same ideas about listening, empathy, vulnerability can apply to really any situation. Here, let's watch a brief clip from the episode. Hear a little bit from Liam the zebra.
When I tell my friends that what they are going through sounds hard, they really appreciate it. I like my friends. I want to help them. An important thing I ask each of my friends after listening to them is, how can I help? Sometimes they'll ask me to help them tell an adult about their feelings. I tell my friends that I will be here for them. It helps them to know that they aren't alone. I know I can't make everything better for my friends, but these are some ways that I can help them know that they are loved.
It's one of the student projects that I've been able to advise that I'm most proud of. I think these students really did some good. Notice how, when given the opportunity to collaborate with their peers, to express themselves creatively, my students, Dallin and Cambry, they practiced vulnerability, right? They made media that not only conveyed their experiences with mental illness, but also prompted empathetic listening, and did so with the goal of addressing a challenge that unfortunately faces like an increasing amount of young people today, right? That of mental health concerns. Now, Liam the zebra teaches the kids watching and us that listening in order to help requires us to do certain things, right? To validate others' experiences, to seek to understand their needs, others' needs, to be a calm, kind presence, and to focus on what we can do. Now, there might be some among you today that think Benjamin, this is all so warm and fuzzy. What we're dealing with right now is like societal collapse, global ecological ruin, right? Political corruption. You really think that this is going to help? And I would say absolutely, right? Certainly there is a place for us to get into the streets and let our voices be heard through activism. Certainly there's a place for us to go and try to create new legislation. Certainly there's a place for us to pour our money, our resources, our time, right, into making change in like these very concrete, these really pragmatic, strategic ways. But I think Renee makes a great point. Activism and empathy are not antithetical. And in some ways, right, we might benefit from shifting our approach to be sensitive listeners and empathetic citizens as a means of trying to make this kind of collective positive social change that we've been discussing. Now, we have a chance to spend the next few minutes doing a group discussion. Yamaya has been helpful enough to split us up into breakout rooms. So in just a couple of minutes, we're going to jump into these big breakout rooms. We're going to discuss some key practices from some potential applications of our conversation about media literacy and active listening in our particular communities, right? Our classrooms, our areas of influence, whatever context that we're working within. In our groups, I want us to take each about a minute to introduce ourselves. And you can share your name and your preferred pronouns and your institutional affiliation, your location, whatever you'd like. And then after taking that moment to get to know each other, I want us to explore some of these questions together. And it can be one or more of any of these questions, but just to prompt some discussion, I want us to consider the following. One, what's a characteristic of active listening that, I don't know, you or the community that you work in, right, struggles with? What's one effort that you might make to facilitate active listening among those that you serve? What's an example of media that you feel promotes empathy and vulnerability? And then how might we use creative collaboration to foster dialogue and understanding? Now, again, you can address one or more of the questions. It's meant to just be like an active conversation, a conversation that, though, that is grounded in some of the concepts that we talked about. Don't worry, Renee's putting the questions in the chat, so we'll have those when we go into the breakout room, even when you're not able to see the slide. Same thing with these kind of concepts, this running list of characteristics. During our small group discussion, I want you to remember to practice some of the principles that were introduced today, right, by these different examples. When you come back in a few minutes, be prepared to share some insights that you had through these little dialogues about some of the challenges facing your particular communities, and also some of the opportunities that you have to use media literacy and active listening to help address those challenges. I think that we have about 15-ish minutes to do that. And so, Yamaya, if you could help break us into some breakout rooms, we will go ahead and hop in. And we'll see you guys in about 15 minutes.
Hey, so why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? Cecilia, you go first.
Okay, I'm Cecilia Beecher from the University of Lisbon, and we had the wonderful privilege of having Renee with us at 2 weeks ago. And I work with in English Studies Department, Canadian Literature, Narrative Medicine, which is something that I think has a lot of parallels with media literacy, especially as you're listening.
Who's next? Introduce yourself, please.
Okay, I'll go. I'm David Graycon. I'm a US Fulbright Scholar in Transylvania, Romania at Transylvania University of Brasov. And I'm doing a media literacy project here until June. And this particular course is interesting to me because I just did a master's in organizational leadership, and I took a class on listening. I thought it was really interesting. So a lot of this, but the class really didn't have anything to do with media literacy. So it's interesting to try to connect some of these concepts. So yeah, nice to be here.
Glad you're here. Chris, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Barton. I'm a book editor in Tulsa, Oklahoma, editing books written by first responders. And also I am a media literacy advocate here in the state, and it's a tough road to hoe, because we have our political people that are different about that. So anyway, I'm glad to be here and helping to promote and helping to join the conversation.
Wonderful. We're glad you're here. Tamar, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone. I'm very glad to see you because the day before yesterday you were in Tbilisi. Maybe you are in Georgia again, I don't know, but I'm sorry that I have not come because I had some aches and I was in the Zoom and listening to your lecture, and it was really very grateful. And I wish that all other students also to listen this lecture, and I think YouTube link will be promoted for them. So I'm Tamar Alpaidze. I'm a professor of law. But I worked in journalistics for 25 years on the radio broadcasting system, and that's why I mentioned these two series together, and that's why I make media law in Georgia. It was 2008. It was a new discipline, but I was teaching as a media literacy, as a media ethics, regulation, self-regulations, and so informational law also. Now I'm working on the new sphere. It's cyber law, it's communications law, it's some cybersecurity aspects, but that's why the media literacy is the main bomb, I think, for world, not for our country, for everyone. I'm thinking how to promote this for all stages and steps of education. And I'm very glad to see you, and I will be with you always when you will call me for help or for
Thank you.
If you are in Georgia, I wanted to give you my book, but it's in Georgian language, but has some aspects in English also. And I want to translate this also for all, and it's for future.
Cool. Thank you for introducing yourself. And obviously we're coming from all over the world, but we're talking about this characteristics of listening, the stuff we're struggling with. What are we struggling with? What makes it hard?
I think that the best listener is who can listen and who knows how to listen. So, thank you.
What is a characteristic of active listening that you and your community struggle with?
The main for me, it's in news and innovations in education. Because everything changed. When I'm trying to get lecture without visuality, nobody listens. When you're getting some effect, everybody is listening. I have one example when I was promoting myself in the parliament. Nobody listened me, but when I told them that if you will listen this something, they stopped and there were silence. And after this, they listen everything correctly. And after this, they participate in questions, in discussions. So there is some effect which is not activation, which is maybe silence also. There are a lot of methods. I think the creativity is the best way to take some attentions from listeners.
Thank you for sharing. Who's next? Questions are in the chat. Cecilia?
I think hierarchies, like for instance, I work in an academic institution, so hierarchies can really buffet the capacity to listen to, or that because if somebody comes from a student, for instance, the student's voice is not as powerful as the teacher's voice or as a higher professor. And I suppose this is one of the reasons why I enjoy the medical humanities or narrative medicine, because you sit around a table with a text which introduces a neutrality. Like, I found it really interesting what Tamar mentioned, that there has to be a preparation for listening. And this, I think, for instance, within my world, the either film or literary text or this kind of a neutral atmosphere, where we can come together around a collective element, and then each voice can be heard. It's but there definitely has to be a preparation for listening. My mother, I come from a big family, so our the motto in our house was, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth."
So you should listen more than you speak.
Yes. Which, because we were at least 9 or 10 people around the table, there was a necessity to have it. And so if someone manipulated the conversation, it would come back to, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth," which was a very simple thing, but it did prepare you for the necessity to listen, that you didn't necessarily have to be the contributor. And so I find that in our academic world, that these working around the text can also give neutrality, because the issue can be discussed through the way a character deals with a situation, rather than through how I feel about the situation. And now I will use my 2 ears and I will close my 1 mouth.
Thank you for sharing. Who's next? I love this point about talking about literature can neutralize the vulnerability of talking about yourself.
No,
that's very important.
Oh, it was like in my doctoral work, this was huge. When you were allowed young people to talk through their relationship with the character, you understood that you were talking about very serious issues in their lives, but there was always this protection. And our feeling of not exposure. Anyway, sorry.
Chris, David, which of those questions do you want to tackle?
I would like to have somebody answer the question, the example of a media that promotes empathy and vulnerability, because the media is objective, right? And so how, without talking heads, I mean, forget about it. So that's if anybody can answer that question, I would give them a prize. All right.
I'll tell you one example
of
media that I feel promotes empathy and vulnerability. It was a show called The Good Fight. It was on during the pandemic. It featured what was her name? I can't remember the name of the actress. It was a legal drama, but each of the characters was flawed in really interesting ways. And we saw each of these characters make some crazy mistakes, but they were the kind of mistakes that when you were watching them go through it, you kind of did empathize with them, right? They were making a bad choice. The lawyer, for instance, decides that she's going to do microdosing on MDMA or ecstasy or something. And this is her way of coping with the fact that violence in the streets is erupting and the police-public relationship is broken, and she's in despair about what's happening in America. And so she turns to drugs, basically. And we see the way we see her in therapy. So we see listening happening in the therapy. We see in her relationships as people try to figure out what's going on with her, what is the real source of her despair. So I feel like that's a show where I remember when I was watching it thinking, oh my God, these are such authentic conversations, and they have enough trust to be vulnerable with each other. And I feel like, that's something, you're right, we don't see that a lot in media.
Yeah. If I could, there was a film that I used in my doctoral work because I was looking at how watching certain types of films could affect young people's anxiety. So I was working with 15 to 18-year-olds. And the film that was an extraordinarily positive, it worked across the board for all age groups, was Cameron Crowe's Elizabethtown. And I think the reason this worked was it was a narrative arc that started with an ending and began with it started with an ending and began and ended with a beginning. Even though, okay, he kind of sold out in the last 10 minutes, he did the conventional, happy ending, but you didn't need that. But along this, there was a tremendous humor, wonderful music, and I used the psychometric scales to measure reductions or increases in anxiety levels before and after the effect. And then I also did open answer self-reporting questionnaires to see if the participants were aware of the changes that were happening.
Wow.
And
you mean to say you measured the impact of talking about literature?
Yes, yes. I did with I had about 150 people from different, mainly teens, but I worked with different films. And with this film, with Cameron Crowe's Elizabethtown, it was where because sometimes the anxiety levels reduced and they attributed this to the fact that I felt better because I relaxed, which is authentic. But when it came to Cameron Crowe's Elizabethtown, which is kind of a chick flick in all fairness, but it deals with a Huckleberry Finn kind of chick flick, if you know what I mean. Many participants said that they felt better because they had identified with the character. They had seen situations that they had lived in their lives, and they'd seen a solution. And there's just such humor in it. So it wasn't a heavy film, despite the fact. And I think another one like this would definitely maybe be The Perks of a Wallflower, which is an extraordinary film, which deals with teen anxiety in a way that I think I've never seen anything else. You kind of have hair standing up on the end of your head. And anyway, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm not monopolizing the conversation.
I thought that was very generative, actually. Media that invites us to think about promoting, that invites us to be empathic and vulnerable, or shows us what that looks like.
Yes, yeah, and The Perks of Being a Wallflower, it is the most amazing. I don't know if you know. I'm putting it here.
Is it the movie? There's like a million. I'm at the IMDb site right now going, there's like a million different of them.
I'll send the link to you.
You rock.
Okay.
What are the challenges you face with people engaging and listening? In my community right now, there's a lot of righteousness, right? Everybody's really certain of their rightness. And that is just, I don't really, and even when I use the word righteousness, it feels wrong. It feels accusatory. And so I'm not sure what's the better way to explain it, but everybody seems so certain that they're right. And even I feel certain that I'm right.
Yeah. For us, righteousness, maybe not so much, but activism is a huge, being on the right side of activism is
The room is
All right. It looks
We're back.
back. Let me hop back in. I
right,
am curious. Oh, Renee, are you there?
I
Great.
am. So highlights and lowlights of your room, Ben?
Oh my gosh, we had some good conversation in our room, talking about what are the ways that we can kind of introduce in a non-confrontational way this idea of like listening to people specifically that don't agree with us, that feel differently than us, whose experiences. And one of the members of our group, Isabeau, talked about the use of games to do such, that she's had experience with her organization using a type of gamification to kind of in a very like accessible, low stakes way introduce people to other perspectives and has found success with it. Kristen in our group also shared both a TED Talk from Chimamanda Adichie and also a series of Sesame Street episodes that talk about empathy and that promote understanding. So we had like some great examples of media in particular that modeled empathy, that promoted dialogue, and that kind of was media that listened. It was pretty cool. How about in your group, Renee? What did you guys talk about?
We talked about the power of close listening and the way in which, or close reading, and the way in which gathering around a work of literature or a film created an opportunity for people to talk about characters and conflicts that was meaningful, but that it wasn't so, you didn't have to be so intimate or vulnerable. And so we shared examples of different kinds of movies and books and TV shows that did that. Cecilia recommended Elizabethtown, the film from, I don't know, 2005. So I'm dying to rewatch that. And I think I have found success with that method as well. But we did struggle to talk about how media depicts being vulnerable and depicts being authentic and depicts listening, because it's not so common.
No, it's too much. Like Legin said in her critique at the beginning of the webinar, right? So much of media is loud. It's distracting, right? Maybe it's informational. It's interested in communicating something to us and not necessarily kind of opening up a space for listening or for conversation. Pam, what about in your room? Did you guys have any comments that or ideas that came up that you found that are going to stay with you after today?
Oh yeah. Well, Joyce kicked us off with with talking about how angry and confused she is right now, and how Dana Boyd's South by Southwest talk resonated with her about, can media literacy, information literacy be effective in an epistemology rich environment? And that kicked us off, and we talked a lot about separating what to do to calm ourselves down when our buttons are being pushed. And Mr. Rogers and Daniel Tiger made an appearance, and we never got to number 4.
Well, that sounds like a good conversation. Yeah, I think it is easy to go down that road that I think Boyd like pretty effectively illustrates, is that like when does critical engagement stop and like cynicism start, right? That we want to be able to make sense of the world and make sense of media representations of the world, and to effectively engage with these things. But at a certain point, right, do we lose hope? Do we become cynical? And how do we kind of prevent us and our students from going down that path? It sounds like there were some great conversations. Before we end for today, I do want to share some resources and also an opportunity for involvement to all of you. As Renee mentioned earlier, she and I are currently collaborating on this initiative, Courageous Rhode Island. It's funded by a grant from the Department of Homeland Security, and its initiatives, its objective, right, is to use education, active listening, dialogue to prevent the hate that leads to violence. As part of this initiative, we're doing a couple of things. First, like, you can check out the website here. We've created, for example, some curriculum that correspond with the different topics that we've discussed over the past several months with the participants in the program. And as part of this curriculum, I have developed a series of creative expressive activities that specifically correspond with some of the ideas that we've talked about today. So for example, if you go on this ripple effect theme and then go down to this creative expression ideas, I've developed like little creative activities. For example, this little Red Rover game that has students or other participants kind of make sense of some of their similarities and differences, try to use the game to find some common ground. I've also created like a little project prompt, which participants can create a 1 to 3 minute documentary that profiles a member of their community that is actively trying to listen, to build trust, to address challenges facing their community. There's a number of these. I think there's something like 12 of these little activities and projects on our website in these different themes. So if you're looking for opportunities to use media, to use creativity, to use collaboration to promote active listening, to promote dialogue, this is a great resource that you guys can pull from. There's also something that I wanted to share with you. Renee mentioned that we have this youth media contest coming up this next year. So it's running from January to March. Students from college, high school, middle school are all eligible to participate. And essentially what it is an opportunity for them to create video, audio, images in the form of designs or illustrations or photographs, as well as written work that addresses these themes that we're talking about today, that addresses the importance of creating dialogue, the importance of using empathy and understanding as a means of preventing violence, preventing political division, preventing war, preventing extremism. And so we'd invite you to also like visit that website, check out some of the information there. I believe we have the links both to that curriculum, those resources, and to the youth media contest in the chat. And so I'd invite you to share or save those links and to also to share them with the people that you feel like would be interested in them. The youth media contest, it's as Renee mentioned, right? We have the opportunity for kids, these young people, to be able to share their voices, but also ultimately to be recognized for their contributions, for their perspectives in these different prizes that we're offering. There's also one more opportunity that I wanted to share with you, is that this is the first of a series of webinars that I'm leading with the Media Education Lab. The next one is on media literacy and bridge building, and it's being held in 2 weeks from today, same time, Wednesday at 4 Eastern time. And I believe in the chat, there's a link that if you are interested in continuing these conversations we started today, you can jump on that link and register for that webinar. And we'll be able to take the next steps, see what beyond, in addition to listening, we can do to address some of these like really needed issues, right, that we're facing today in our society. That is, I believe, everything we have. Feel free to reach out to me or Renee if you have any questions. And I want to just give you one, like a bit of thanks for coming and chatting with us today. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you.
Ben, we want to give you a big round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Oh, thank you all.
We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. We hope you come back and tell a friend, won't you? See you next time. Bye-bye. Good night, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.